So I've decided to read this all in one go because the word count for this script is roughly about as long as an average episode of our series. So this way we'll have a good idea of how long it takes to narrate one of those from the beginning. Here is our first real preview of Tales of Atonement Glitch. If you've been with us for a while, you know that Glitch in this context is a period piece from the mid to late 1990s going into the year 2000. One of the biggest concerns for the average person during that time was the fears surrounding the Y2K computer glitch. For anyone who doesn't remember this time, the Y2K computer glitch was a phenomenon that suggested the world's computer systems would all crash on the eve of New Year's 2000 because the clocks inside the computer would only roll over the last 2 digits. This meant that while it should read the full date as January 1st, 2000, it would actually read it as January 1st, 1900, leading to computers shutting down or failing to connect to the internet because they hadn't been invented yet. It sounds crazy, I know, but there was a real-world concern over this because of all of the implications. Planes falling out of the sky, missile defense systems malfunctioning and automatically launching their payloads, electricity and water treatment plants stop functioning. Forget just trying to check your email when your bank statement comes and they say they can't find any of the money you have saved up because the bank's accounting system no longer functions. Given all this, we took the absurdity to a dystopian level that leads to a near-apocalyptic scenario. But before all that happens, life is just normal. And for our main characters in this series, Aaron Tremblay and Layla Castile, they're just normal teenagers. For the most part. Aaron is French-Canadian living in British Columbia to a lower middle-class family. During the 1990s, Canada was just starting to recover from a huge recession, so there were tons of social reforms going on that led to things like socialized healthcare, more job growth, and investment in small businesses and computer technology. Computers of any kind were incredibly expensive by comparison in those days. A computer like the one Aaron is using in this pic could easily run his family $2,000. If we adjusted for the inflation today, that same PC could easily cost double the price. So a teenager didn't just get a computer just as a gaming rig alone, like many of us do now. There was also an educational lean. The big tech push of using AI today mirrors the push for your basic computer back then. So many parents were led to believe that without a computer, their child would be falling behind academically. This would mean that Aaron's initial sell to get his parents on getting him a computer would have been for the perspective of a high schooler preparing for college and potentially the rest of his adult life. So while the basic Pentium 133 could technically do the trick for anything Aaron wanted to do online, it wouldn't have had the real oomph to run his favorite games. For that, he'd need something like the 3DFX Voodoo or Voodoo 2 graphics card, an advanced sound card for its time like the Sound Blaster AWE64 or the Yamaha XG. A computer like the Gateway G6266 or Dell Dimensions XPS would also do the trick. These were high-end computers at the time, usually running Windows 95 or 98 operating systems. At this time, computers, especially the ones like this, would have been considered a serious luxury item, costing something between 7 to 10% of the typical household's annual income. The justification would have been that he would use it while in high school and as an encyclopedia, a learning tool, or typing up for schoolwork, and eventually take it with him to college. Not to mention, there was probably some considerable work on chores and other household favors in order to compensate for the heavy expenditure, when something like a used car would have been seen as similarly expensive but far more practical. Still, with those kind of specs, Aaron could definitely play any of the games on his list. Those top 4 would have been Final Fantasy VII, which released on PC in 1998, Baldur's Gate, the first one, that came out in December of 1998 as well, Might and Magic in April of 1998, and Ultima Online in 1997. Final Fantasy VII, I feel, is a game that everyone knows, and either you love it or you hate it at this point. A lot of the favor in Final Fantasy VII comes from it being one of the first Final Fantasy games that Western fans were really exposed to. Sure, on the NES you may have had the original Final Fantasy, and the SNES had Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy VI, which were named Final Fantasy II and III respectively. Why did this happen? Well, the original Final Fantasy released in Japan back in 1987, but didn't really reach American shores until the 1990s. By the time Americans got the first game, Japan had already released Final Fantasy II in 1988 and Final Fantasy III in 1990 for the 8-bit NES. Because the SNES was launching in 1991, Squaresoft, now Square Enix, decided that translating outdated 8-bit games would take too long and yield poor sales. They canceled active translations of Final Fantasy II and jumped right into localizing Final Fantasy IV instead under the bright and shiny new 16-bit graphic system of the SNES. Then, to try and hide the fact they skipped 2 entire games in the franchise to their Western markets, they slapped a 2 on the box, and Final Fantasy VI as Final Fantasy III followed suit. But then why isn't Final Fantasy VII in Japan Final Fantasy IV? Why did they skip from 3 to 7? Well, because in 1997, gaming magazines like Electronic Gaming Monthly and early internet forums had widely exposed the secret Japanese numbering system to Western teenagers. When Final Fantasy VII was scheduled for its massive global release on the PlayStation, Squaresoft ran into a problem. They realized that skipping to Final Fantasy IV in America while Japan got Final Fantasy VII would cause irreversible global marketing confusion, especially since the brand new European market was getting into the series for the first time. So Square just dropped the Western numbering sequence and embraced Final Fantasy VII worldwide, leaving Western gamers to figure out the missing story for themselves. Overall, Final Fantasy VII, well, not my favorite, is definitely the most iconic in the series. The tone and style of the setting and the characters fits perfectly into the vibe of a 1990s teenager that would have also been inundated with shows like Captain Planet and the growing environmental consciousness of the era. Because that is what Final Fantasy VII is about. A group of eco-terrorists saving the world from the life-draining megacorporation, while a megalomaniacal evangelical with a god complex tries to use his religion to destroy the world. Neat, huh? In Baldur's Gate, 1988, the players control a customizable protagonist raised in the secluded library fortress of Candlekeep under the protection of the wise mage known as Gorion. The story is a dark fantasy mystery that scales from an intimate tale of survival into a massive geopolitical conspiracy. The game is divided up into 5 parts, which is convenient because it's also shipped in a whopping 5 discs. We'll get to that in a minute. The story begins with sudden danger. Gorion senses the impending threat, forces the protagonist to pack up, and tries to smuggle them out of Candlekeep under the cover of night. Just outside the fortress walls, they're ambushed by a towering armored figure named Saravok and his band of mercenaries. Gorion sacrifices themselves so the protagonist can escape into the wilderness. Left broke and targeted by assassins, the protagonist teams up with their childhood friend Imoen and other companions as they travel across the Sword Coast toward the metropolis of Baldur's Gate. They find an entire region on the brink of war. The mysterious iron crisis has taken hold. The region's main iron mine is producing poisoned, brittle metal that shatters easily, and caravan routes are plagued by aggressive bandit raids. The neighboring nation of Amn is being blamed, sparking massive military buildup. The protagonist investigates the roots of the crisis, clearing out monsters and mercenaries across the Sword Coast. They infiltrate the Mashkel mines and discover a cleric is deliberately poisoning the iron ore. Then they track the bandits to the Cloakwood Forest, discovering a secret high-tech mine run by a shadowy criminal syndicate called the Iron Throne. The Iron Throne's plot is simple but ruthless. Poison the region's iron, destroy all competition, hoard the only supply of healthy iron, and use their wealth and monopoly to seize political control of the entire city of Baldur's Gate. As the protagonist follows the trail back to the massive city, they learn the terrifying truth about themselves. They are a Baal spawn, a mortal child of Baal, the dead lord of murder. Before Baal was slain during the divine cataclysm, he shattered his divine essence and scattered it all across Faerun, creating children whose blood contained a spark of his dark godhood. And now, here's the climax. The protagonist discovers that Saravok, The armored figure who killed Gorion is actually their half-brother and a fellow Baalspawn. Sarvok is a mastermind behind the Iron Throne. His ultimate plan isn't just money or political power. He wants to orchestrate a bloody, catastrophic war between Baldur's Gate and Amn. He believes that the sheer scale of resulting mass slaughter will trigger a sacrificial ritual, allowing him to inherit Baal's entire essence and ascend to become the new god of murder. In the final showdown, the protagonist infiltrates Sarvok's coronation, exposes his treason to the city leaders, and tracks him to an ancient underground temple of Baal. There, the protagonist defeats Sarvok in brutal battle, preventing the war and saving the Sword Coast, though their own journey, as a child of murder, is only just beginning. It's kind of funny how that plot and Final Fantasy VII are vaguely similar when you really think about it. But this cliffhanger ending was notorious and set up the hype for Baldur's Gate 2, the direct sequel. While Baldur's Gate is grounded in dark political thriller through the fantasy realm of Faerun, and Final Fantasy VII is a sharp critique of corporatism and the dangers of fanatical belief, Might and Magic 6: Mandate of Heaven is a campy, sprawling epic that starts as a traditional medieval fantasy and ends as a high-tech sci-fi space opera. The plot revolves around political destabilization, an apocalyptic doomsday cult, and a hidden alien invasion. The game takes place on the continent of Enroth. The world is thrown into sudden chaos during the Night of Shooting Stars, when what appears to be meteors raining down from the sky. In reality, these are alien colony ships carrying the Kriegans, a horrific, parasitic race of spacefaring bioweapons that closely resemble traditional biblical demons. The good King Roland Ironfist marches an army northwest to confront the demons, but is betrayed by an air mage named Solomon and captured by the Kriegan king Xenofex. With the king missing and Queen Catherine away in another land, the throne is left to their young, impressionable child, Prince Nikolai. As the monsters overrun the land and natural disasters strike, a mysterious new doomsday religion called the Temple of Ba rapidly gains popularity. The charismatic cult leaders preach that the endless calamities are proof that the Iron Fist royal family has lost the Mandate of Heaven. Mandate of Heaven is a real-world Chinese philosophy and political doctrine that was used in ancient and imperial China to legitimize the rule of the king or emperor of China. While Might and Magic 6 follows a more vaguely European-style monarchy, monarchistic rule has long held the belief that the royal family's right to rule comes from God. Where the Mandate of Heaven steps in, then, is determined by how well or how fairly the rule governs his kingdom. It was common belief that natural disasters such as famine or flood, or in this case, demonic invasion, were divine retributions bearing signs of the heavens' displeasure with the ruler. So there'd be revolts following major disasters as people saw these calamities as signs that the Mandate of Heaven had been withdrawn. This is the sort of philosophy behind this plot. So the player controls a custom party of 4 ordinary citizens from the town of Sweetwater, which was completely obliterated during the Kriegan landing, saved and trained by a powerful wizard named Falagar. It's always a wizard in these old games. The party ventures out into the world to uncover the truth. Early on, they find the body of the traitorous mage, Solomon, and recover letters linking the Temple of Ba directly to the Kriegan alien invaders. To find a way to stop the invasion, the heroes must consult with the Oracle of Enroth, an ancient omniscient intelligence hidden beneath the royal capital. However, the Oracle can only be accessed with the unanimous Keys of State permission from the High Council of Enroth, which is made up of 6 regional lords. The middle portion of the game is a massive sandbox journey. The lords are all incredibly corrupt, always bickering, and largely incompetent. They refuse to grant permission until the party completes demanding high-stakes favors for each of them, of course, because things like fixing local infrastructure, curing a plague, or rescuing captive nobles should definitely be trusted into the hands of 4 ordinary plucky citizens and not like an actual executive branch of government. Don't you hate it when the executive branch has no fucking clue what's going on? Furthermore, the party must expose and banish a high-ranking cult traitor embedded directly inside the council who has been stalling the political process. The modern relevance! But then comes the sci-fi twist. Once the council is united, the party unlocks the Oracle's chamber. The game drops its medieval fantasy disguise. The Oracle is actually a supercomputer left behind thousands of years ago by an advanced spacefaring civilization known as the Ancients. Very Assassin's Creed when you think about it. All magic is basically Isu technology. The Oracle explains the Kriegans are a galactic plague. They cannot be defeated by standard iron weapons or magic spells because their central stronghold, the Hive, is protected by an impervious energy shield. To breach it, the party must raid a series of ancient high-tech pyramids to obtain blaster rifles and laser weaponry left behind by the Ancients. Haha, in essence, now I cast non-magic missile! Armed with sci-fi laser blasters, the party infiltrates the Hive. They blast their way through the waves upon waves of alien demons and assassinate the Kriegan Queen once and for all. Are you seeing yet how the things 90s kids experience had a huge impact on the writers of this series? I'm literally a pyromancer, and my stepsister is a freaking cyborg. I know, I'm not supposed to use that word. It's actually incredibly offensive in my time to call any sci-tech human a cyborg because of the connotations of the Borg in Star Trek. It suggests that anyone using cybernetic bodies is ultimately a subconscious hive mind. I'll get into the problems with that later, though. Ultima Online. The Ultima franchise, you might be surprised to know, is much older than Warcraft. In fact, Ultima Online, which released in 1997, directly paved the way for World of Warcraft in 2004. But because of the Y2K glitch that actually wrecked computer systems in our time, Warcraft wasn't ever actually developed. The very first Ultima game was released in 1981, defining the early Western RPG genre. When the MMO launched in September 16 years later, it was the first major commercially successful graphical Morpeg with a record of over 100,000 active subscribers within the first year. Now, the reason why I've chosen to talk about the game itself rather than the plot elements are definitely because of the cultural impact that Ultima had. While at its peak, Ultima Online topped off at 250,000 subscribers, whereas WoW's peak dwarfs that by 12 million. Ultima's player base was a special kind of lawless toxicity that shaped how future games would utilize everything from player interactions to online dev protections. Ultima Online was less a standard video game and more a chaotic, lawless social experiment, because there was no blueprint for how thousands of people should behave together in a virtual space. OU fundamentally altered internet culture. Take, for instance, the emergent player economies. OU featured a completely open market economy driven entirely by players. Teenagers learned supply and demand economics, which would have been one of Aaron's selling points, by gathering wood, crafting player armor, and setting up player-run vendor stalls outside major cities. It also birthed the real money gaming trading market. Rare digital real estate, like a virtual castle plot, routinely sold for thousands of actual US dollars on early eBay auctions. Now, if you thought microtransactions now were bad, then there's the assassination of Lord British. In 1997, the game's creator Richard Garriott logged into the beta server via his legendary invincible avatar, Lord British, to deliver a royal speech. A player named Rains noticed a lapse in the server protections, used a simple firewall spell, and burned the supposedly immortal creator to a crisp on stage. It remains one of the most famous pieces of emergent digital folklore in history. But so, because everything was run by the players, and PvP was an option, this led to the first instances of virtual griefing or virtual trauma by players. OU featured full loot PvP and open world thievery. If your character died anywhere outside of the town guard site, any random player could completely strip your character of all your weapons, gold, and armor that you'd spend weeks and possibly hard-earned money earning. It introduced the concept of griefing and ganking to the modern lexicon, including genuine real-world stress and anger for the players. Real quick definitions here, folks. Griefing refers to an act of deliberately irritating, harassing, or disrupting other players within a multiplayer game. It roots in the early 2000s online gaming culture. Gank, on the other hand, has older origins, coming out of 1980s South Central LA hip-hop slang, To gank means to steal, con, or mug someone. The term likely originated as a blend of gang kill, or as an acronym for go around and kill. It was popularized in hip-hop lyrics in the 1980s before being broadly adopted in internet culture, like a lot of other Agave slang has been in modern-day gaming. Don't forget, United States, how much of the culture you enjoy comes directly from black people. Ultimately, WoW replaced UO in 2004 because it fixed a lot of the pain points that kept early 1990s MMOs niche. Ultima dropped you into a sandbox with no quest markers, no direction, and a high probability of being mugged by online strangers. WoW revolutionized the theme park MMO design. It coddled players with exclamation points over NPCs' heads, guided level paths, and entirely safe environments where players couldn't steal your hard-earned gear. Blizzard spent a decade building up the lore of Azeroth through 3 incredibly successful Warcraft RTS games, so when World of Warcraft dropped, millions of strategy fans were eager to walk through iconic settings like Stormwind and Ironforge in first-person perspective. Warcraft went on to be phenomenally popular, a pop culture icon, and I have no hate for it. It just, unfortunately for the time, doesn't exist in our continuity. But the biggest threat to players in Ultima Online wasn't griefers, gankers, or even predatory eBay auctions. It was your parents making a phone call. In the 1990s, internet connection relied almost exclusively on dial-up. This is a method of accessing the internet that uses a standard copper telephone landline to transmit data. The computer modem would then dial a specific phone number belonging to an internet service provider such as AOL or Earthlink. Once the receiving computer answers, the two machines would communicate by converting digital computer data into audible audio frequencies that sounded like this. The problem is, anyone picking up a physical house phone like the one Aaron's mom is using interrupts this process, resulting in a disconnection. For perspective, dial-up speeds in the late 1990s, the absolute peak was only about 96 kilobytes per second. This meant a single song download took about 10 to 15 minutes. A modern website could take several minutes to fully render. Because of these slow speeds, the line monopoly I mentioned just a moment ago, and the pay-per-minute call structure of the 1990s, it's no wonder this type of connection went obsolete. Households were typically paying the phone company and the ISP just to spend 10 minutes staring at a blue bar go up so we could listen to MMMBop. As I look around the room, you can also see a lot of Aaron's other interests. He's got a copy of The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. He's got a copy of the Draconomicon. The Draconomicon first released in October of 1990, though many people still confuse it for a 1980s Dungeons & Dragons manual. This is because it was first designed by Nigel Findlay for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons in the second edition, published by TSR as a 128-page accessory tailored to the Forgotten Realms campaign setting, the same as Baldur's Gate. Understanding this book provides an excellent example of how late 80s and early 1990s nerd culture was evolving. The most common reason people confuse the Draconomicon for a 1980s book is because of the art aesthetic. People like Jeff Aisley, Brom, Keith Parkinson, and David Dorman contributed to the cover art and the book's interior illustrations. Heavyweight's the high fantasy aesthetic of the mid to late 80s that gave the early 90s manual a distinctly nostalgic and old school feel. Now, why was this book so important? Well, because the Draconomicon changed fundamentally how players interacted with dragons in their campaign settings. Rather than treating them like a mountain of hit points sitting on an ocean of gold coins, the Draconomicon gave important context to things like dragon biology, language, magic, and the ready-to-use adventures crafted by titans of the industries that DMs could use to make dragons not just NPC mobs, but truly terrifying challenges. During the 90s, D&D was finally able to recover from the satanic pandemic of the 80s, so shifted towards heavy, lore-driven storytelling. Because of the Draconomicon's success and positive reception, TSR released an entire series of Forgotten Realms accessory books, including the Drow the Underdark book in 1991, Pirates and Smugglers of the Sword Coast in 93, and the Code of Harpers, also in 1993. One thing the Draconomicon also contained was detailed information on different colors of dragons. In D&D, different colored dragons are treated like different breeds or species of the same creature. Many of them have preferred environments like forests for green dragons and deserts for blue. This relates to the 5 dragons scattered through this image. By the time it's done, you'll be able to find one of each of the 5 basic colors: white, red, green, black, and blue. These relate to how the goddess Tiamat is depicted in D&D, as a 5-headed dragon, each head representing one of the colors respectively. This is a direct adaptation of the original 1975 D&D supplement Greyhawk, written by Gary Gygax. Gygax lifted the Mesopotamian primordial goddess of chaos in the sea, as well as the Arabic cosmological giant fish from their respective mythologies, and fundamentally transformed them into the platinum dragon Bahamut and the 5-headed chromatic dragon that was named Tiamat. Roughly a decade later, Hironobu Sakaguchi and his team designed the first Final Fantasy game in 1987. Because they were massive fans of the Western tabletop, they largely populated their world with monsters and mechanics lifted straight from D&D, including both Tiamat and Bahamut, the latter of which has become a staple in every Final Fantasy game since. And how about some of the random clutter in Aaron's room? He's got a poster for the Endless Quest. This is a series of choose-your-own adventure books published by TSR's educational department. TSR wanted to design books that could be integrated into school reading curricula to build problem-solving skills in children. The project was championed by Rose Estes, an American author and employee of Tactical Studies Rules, with an extensive biography of work spanning the 1980s and the 1990s. These choose-your-own adventure books didn't require paper, pencil, or dice. Instead, they were entirely narrative-focused. At the end of each page, readers would be given a choice like, if you hit the goblin with your dagger, turn to page 45, or if you sneak into the hole in the wall, turn to page 83. In 2018, 4 books serving as an Endless Quest revival were written by Matt Forbeck and represented one of 4 D&D classes: Fighter, Wizard, Rogue, and Cleric, with an explicit setting of Forgotten Realms and the escape from Castle Ravenloft. You might also notice he has a map of a place called Dominaria. Dominaria is a continent on which the lore of the Magic the Gathering world takes place. You might know Magic the Gathering from the extensive card games printed by Wizards of the Coast, but in the 1990s and early 2000s, there was also an extensive book series. The most important one here is The Brothers' War. The Brothers' War told the story of 2 brothers, Urza, the older, and Mishra, the younger. Urza was the logical brother, while Mishra was more emotional. They each carried the power of special stones, red and green respectively. The red stone Urza named the Might Stone, while the green was named the Weak Stone. This represented the Might Stone's ability to make machines stronger and provide energy, while the Weak Stone had the ability to drain energy and break constructs. However, Mishra initially saw this as a slight against him and accused Urza of calling him weak. Overall, the most important takeaway from the Brothers' War is how hubris destroys men, how war separates families, and how sometimes there are no heroes, only opposing views whose actions against each other lead to nothing but the destruction of others around them. It's a cautionary tale against spite, revenge, and ego, and I cannot recommend it enough. Definitely an excellent read. This coffee cup here says Capilano Coffee Company, which is a reference to the Capilano Cafe located in the Capilano Suspension Bridge Park in British Columbia, where Aaron lives. This 460-foot suspension bridge that runs across the Capilano River was originally built in 1889 by a Scottish civil engineer named George Mackay. Mackay's bridge was built with hemp ropes and cedar planks, but these were replaced with wire cable bridge in 1903, just a few years before the bridge was bought by Edward Mahone. In 1935, Mac McEachran purchased the bridge from Mahone and invited local natives to place their totem poles in the park. The current owner of the bridge is Nancy Stibbard, who would also have been the current owner in 1998 as well. By this time, the suspension bridge would have also been featured in several TV series of the time, including MacGyver, Sliders, and The Crow: Stairway to Heaven. And in 1978, a pair of social psychologists used the bridge for an extremely fascinating and well-known experiment. Donald Dutton and Arthur Aaron were studying emotions, and so they placed a female researcher on the bridge to approach the men that crossed. What the experiment showed is that the men who were approached on the suspension bridge were more likely to call back the researcher than the men who were approached similarly in a more stable bridge on the other side of the river. The two argued that the men were misattributing the arousal caused by fear to sexual attraction towards the woman. And this experiment seemed to back up the two-factor theory of emotion that posits that when an emotion is felt, a physiological arousal occurs, and the person uses this immediate environment to find emotional cues to label the psychological effect. Because basically fear and physical arousal are controlled by the exact same chemicals in your brain, the difference between being turned on or terrified all comes down to your cognitive framing. That's the science behind being scaroused. That doesn't have a whole lot to do with the story at hand, but it does explain why the brain can misattribute an adrenaline rush, and is actually why a lot of horror movies would contain provocative scenes with attractive female actresses. It's literally there to make you more afraid. I think a few of the other items here are pretty self-explanatory. Pictures and papers and notebook pads, but since I've actually seen some memes online that people confused what it meant by 1990s to burn CDs, I might as well go ahead and throw that in here. CDs, or compact discs, are an optional disc format developed by both Philips and Sony to store and play data. They are capable of holding up to 80 minutes of uncompressed audio, or about 700 megabytes of data. They were the dominant music and software medium through the 1990s into the 2000s. CDs store information as tiny, microscopic bumps called pits and flat areas called lands on a spiral track. When the CD's laser hits the disc, the difference in reflection is read and converted into a digital binary that then translates into sound or computer data. Burning CDs were how you would write these pits and lands on the disc. Computers with a CD drive, the little cup holster that comes out in some computers when you press the button, could not only be used to read a CD, but also write it. And programs like Windows Media Player used to have a burn selection that would copy music information onto the disc using the same internal laser that it would to read music as well. So burning a CD literally meant using a laser to alter the reflective surface of the disc. Floppy disks, also known as the universal save icon, were the digital storage units largely replaced by CDs, though some older computers in key areas may still utilize disks like these as a backup. The disc took on a number of forms through the years, such as the 8-inch disc developed by IBM in 1967, the 5.2-inch disc used by both Apple and IBM, and the final standard 3.5-inch floppy, which was encased in a rigid plastic siding with a metal shutter, all to protect the magnetic disc inside. Despite this, even the 3.5s were highly susceptible to magnetic interference and dust, making them prone to data corruption. If you're interested in older tech like this, I might suggest the Museum of Obsolete Media, a website dedicated to a bunch of old tech. How about that cup on the kitchen counter? This one isn't so obvious, but it just wouldn't be the 90s without it. That's right, the jazz design. The jazz design is an extremely popular piece of 1990s nostalgia seen on cups, vans, this dude's arm. Needless to say, it runs deep. Now, I didn't feel like doing the actual design here, so this is more of just a reference with two teal lines on top and bottom with a purple line through the middle. The actual jazz design looks different, but then, why the recreation of video game boxes? Well, see, the jazz design also has a little bit of real-world controversy behind it. It was originally introduced in 1982 by the Sweetheart Cup Company, but was later purchased by Solo Cup in 2004. But who designed it? That remained a mystery until 2015. In a popular Reddit thread that year, it was discovered that Gina Eakes was the original designer. However, that same year, another designer named Stephanie Miller claimed to have been the original creator. The current owner of the design, Solo Cup, could not confirm who was the original creator once and for all, mostly because so many of the people who were employed during that time were no longer with the company. However, what is known is that neither Miller nor Eakes received any monetary royalties for the cult popular design despite its effectiveness, as they were both just paid their normal salary for being artists employed by a corporation. Proof that capitalism has never favored art.
Or artists.
The Mystic Tavern RPG is the key, pivotal environment of Tales of Atonement Glitch. It represents the place where Aaron and Layla first meet over a shared enjoyment of free-form role-playing. Among early chat rooms, the Mystic Tavern was legendary. It was one of the premier hubs of the 1990s free-form role-playing movement. Instead of relying on a computer game engine to process stats, actions, and combat, everything was powered by pure, collaborative, creative writing types in real time. This is the exact way that we write the stories of Tales of Atonement. For instance, the characters are created and then assigned to a specific writer, myself or the co-author, and then those interactions are typed out collaboratively turn by turn. This is our small attempt to keep this section of internet alive. In actuality, the FFRP movement is further supported by the existence of this story series. But to fully understand how, we should look at the mechanics and the specific culture of the Mystic Tavern. In the late 1990s, the Lycos search engine hosted a massively popular Java applet-based chat network. Before Lycos officially designated role-playing rooms, creative writers would colonize standard rooms or crowd into specific corner generic channels. These were often known as Lycos' pool parties. Most people were simply playing a version of themselves, attending an imaginary pool party, and that further evolved into more complex or creative characters like elves, centaurs, vampires, and others. Eventually, the Mystic Tavern became an official fixture, nestled in the random chat section. The official name of the country was Randomia, in the city of Lycosia, and the Mystic Tavern represented a classic D&D you begin in a tavern trope. This is what was most compelling to D&D nerds like Aaron. The visual interface was simple: a scrolling block of text, a user list on the right side of the screen, and a text entry bar at the bottom. It was basically like every other modern Discord server, and in fact, Discord is a natural evolution of these systems. The mechanics is with a charm set Mystic Tavern apart from MMOs and text-based MUDs like Dragon Realms. Rather than moving an avatar or typing out commands onto a screen, everything was handled using a strict formatting etiquette that was universally understood. This consisted of three things: the narrative asterisks, the out-of-character brackets, and spoken dialogue. The narrative asterisks represented all player actions. Some people were more creative or unique in how they expressed actions in play, but the vast majority simply used asterisks. No matter how it was done, these were used to differentiate actions and spoken dialogue. Most players entered the scene with an interest post. This was like an announcement that gave a basic overview of what other people would immediately see of your character. Things like their outfit, weaponry, and general disposition could usually be discerned in an entrance post. For example, the heavy oak doors of the tavern swing open, letting in a cold gust of mountain air. A tall, cloaked figure steps inside, the hood casting a shadow over his glowing elven eyes. A notched broadsword rests at his hip. He quietly scans the room before walking toward an empty corner booth. The corner booth is important, by the way. It was often joked about the Mystic Tavern was bigger on the inside, could change shape depending on the post, and was always contained far more corners than it did edges. This is due to the frequency of posts following this type of format, without considering what your typical room can only have just so many empty corners. Out-of-character brackets were typically a single or double parentheses, though some people were similarly creative here as well. Spoken dialogue was either typed directly into the chat without use of any brackets, or enclosed within quotation marks. Putting all this together, an RPG post might look something like this. Agni adjusts the microphone and takes a sip of water. Her voice scratches after so much talking, but she still has more to say. Taking a deep breath, she lightens her tone and continues. Hey chat, by the way, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. If you don't mind my ramblings and you've been watching this long, you must definitely like what I have to say, and this helps out the channel immensely. Now that example's out of the way, let's move on. The Mystic Tavern wasn't immune to the cultural hazards of online play, before the concept evolved into internet trolls. Because there was no automated programming restraints or dice rolls to govern whether an attack hit or a spell worked, the community relied entirely on an honor system, and this birthed specific archetypes that every 90s chat room user encountered. The God Moder. They were the ultimate villain of the chat room. The God Moder was a player who refused to let their character get hurt, lose a fight, or show any weakness. They would type invincible actions that stripped away the other player's agency. For example, a God Moder would type, punches you in the face and shatters your jaw instantly, killing you. In order to counteract this type of toxicity, Lycos developed an etiquette of attempting. Good writers practice proper cooperative storytelling by never guaranteeing an action's success, leaving the outcome up to the other player. A proper 1990s RPer would type, swings his broadsword attempting to catch the traveler across the soldier, leaving room for him to dodge. This allowed the other player to, within reason, come up with a proper way to evade the hits, or accept that, given the constraints of the situation, realistically the only option was to take damage. The opposite was colloquially called autoing, and comprised 90% of arguments in RP. Arguments in RP were generally resolved by community consensus. This either looked like asking the players currently in the room to moderate the combat and discern the outcomes, or by posting proof of the combat into a broader internet forum and allowing more experienced players, and in some cases community-designated councils, to determine the outcome. This, of course, wasn't without its own pitfalls. Popular opinion often left players feeling ostracized or singled out and judged unfairly. The community inside the Lycos Mystic Tavern was, however, fiercely tight-knit despite creative differences. When Lycos began to decline and it shifted its services in the early 2000s, the community refused to let the tavern die. They migrated the community entirely, setting up dedicated independent web domains like themystictavern.com and external message boards to preserve their character and multi-year storylines. Though the sites rarely see much use these days, every so often someone from the past, like me, creeps in from the margins of the internet and breathes a little bit of life into this piece of internet history now preserved by our story. And if Tales of Atonement ends up garnering a new interest in Mystic Tavern and FFRPG, honestly, I couldn't be happier. Maybe one day we'll meet in the tavern and crack open a bottle of ancient blood wine. Something we'll notice toward the end of this video is the actual characters that Aaron and Layla portrayed during their time in the Mystic Tavern, Bowen the Knight and Nora Starr. Bowen the Knight is a direct reference to the character Bowen played by Dennis Quaid in the 1996 film Dragonheart. I will not begin to get into the problematic controversies surrounding both Dennis Quaid and Sean Connery. At the time, they were both beloved actors, but Quaid's outspoken support of Donald Trump and the serious concerns about Connery committing domestic violence removed both of them from grace. That being said, for a period piece in the 1990s, Dragonheart was the fantasy movie that paved the way for the genre to become more mainstream. The CGI for the Dragonheart film was groundbreaking, industry-shifting technological advancement, even if the film itself did receive mixed views. Dragonheart emerged in the immediate post-Jurassic Park era, at a time when Hollywood was testing the limits of digital effects. While Jurassic Park proved audiences would buy into digital monsters, Dragonheart took a riskier step. It introduced the world's first fully computer-generated, co-starring dramatic character who had to speak, express complex emotions, and hold his own alongside human actors. Industrial Light and Magic handled the visual effects that revolutionized facial animation in the CGI space. Carrie Phillips, a software developer for ILM, created a patented program called Caricature, or Cari for short. Cari allowed animators to interactively manipulate the dragon's skin surface rather than work slowly on wireframe modes that couldn't easily map to delicate facial expressions. This breakthrough blended the actors' real-life expressions and phonetic mouth shapes directly into the CGI, making highly believable and charismatic computer-animated puppetry. The success of Draco's CGI had a massive domino effect on future cinema. George Lucas later stated that seeing this digital character work in Dragonheart, as well as in Men in Black, was what finally convinced him that CGI technology was advanced enough to begin production on the Star Wars prequel trilogy that was used extensively with characters like Jar Jar Binks and Watto. Not to mention characters like Smaug in the Hobbit cinematic trilogy, which wouldn't come out until nearly 2 decades later. So ultimately inspired by the movie and his father's recent D&D campaign, Aaron created Bowen the Knight, the untold child of Bowen and Kara, the Prince of the Kingdom of Britannia. More on that later. Layla's character is Nora Starr, inspired by the elegance of Guinevere and the badass warrior woman of Marion. Nora embodies these elements in a high fantasy setting. The difference between the characters shouldn't inherently be the determination of how imaginative or creative either person is. characters in the Mystic Tavern were from every walk of life and fandom. Just look at some of their names on the screen. Goku Zwei, a reference to Dragon Ball, Lady Morrigan, Celtic mythology, and Bob the Slob, who was, at the time, a vagrant character that actually existed and was generally regarded as a bit of a villain and a menace. But why are the characters so pale when Aaron and Layla look like this? The 1990s, a lot of nerd spaces were, unfortunately, fairly racist. Like, I'm not even kidding. Some players even had specifically racist characters. There was even an undead Nazi running around, and since it was overall just a chat room, there weren't any moderation tools to deal with it short of going through the Lycos chat general admin. Seeing the United States in its current form isn't really surprising for people who had to grow up since the 90s and been in online spaces. It isn't surprising to those of melanated origin or the unmelanated who grew up with overtly racist parents. This is a problem that's existed in nerd spaces for years, and seeing the progress that has been made in games and stories to have black and brown protagonists like Yasuke has only highlighted the importance of talking about it. In the 1990s, a lot of black RPers masked behind characters of a different race, or whiteness was basically described as the default. To Aaron's credit, he is specifically playing a character that is the child of two canonically white characters from an existent franchise. But the problem with racism combined with misogyny is what has Layla masking behind the peachy tones of Nora. It wasn't uncommon for female characters or non-white characters to get attacked without provocation. While it was less common in Lycos, it was even more prominent in AT&T, the City of Atonement RPG, which is where Atonement takes its name. I didn't want to end on a serious note, but also I wanted to leave this in part for those who sit through the entire video. If you're this deep in now, obviously you find what I have to say important. So let me take the time to express that racists and other bigots are not welcome here. We are vehemently anti-racist. Unsubscribe if it upsets you. I will feel so much more vindicated knowing you're gone. Woo! On the other hand, if you're on the right side of history like we are, drop a comment about what your favorite piece of 1990s nostalgia is. Leave us a story about your freeform RP that you experienced. Were you ever part of the Mystic Tavern? Those are the people we'd really love to hear from. Thank you everyone for your continued support, and I look forward to giving you even more in the future. Our community keeps expanding with authentic viewers and subscribers that tune in every week excited for the next installment. Whether that's listening to my world-building rants or tuning in for a full episode, you're the ones that keep this channel afloat against an unforgiving algorithm that keeps trying to douse the flame. That's the meaning of many a mickle max a muckle, many smaller things making a big thing. And now, a shout out to our patrons and channel members.
Plebe 64 Potato,
Mr. Lobo King 8778,
P64P,
Regios 001,
Jack Plays K Plays,
Maria Elsa 6363,
Moose Now,
El Dragon Biano 3742,
Jack McLeod,
Persephoroth,
Josh is Mary,
Runaway Train 2502,
EA Shadow Gamer,
Sigma LaFlare,
Crochet Whimsy 413,
Anubian the 1335,
Angels Art and Gaming,
Aisha Kashif,
Pluve 81,
Aegis Knight,
7-Star Sanctuary,
and Chained Furry,
Emily Masternardi,
Heinrich 28,
Shadow Fox,
Arya Gamari,
Charles Tam,
Jace Moreland,
Pammy Poo,
and Lunder Lumen.